Let's continue our study in the Gospel of John. We are now at chapter 8, verses 12 through 20, where the Lord explains how it is that he has authority. Immediately following the dark efforts of the Lord's opponents to bring him down by getting him either to call for the woman to be stoned or call for the law of Moses to be ignored, the Lord tells them he is the light of the world. That stands in stark contrast with their darkness, the darkness that they have demonstrated by obviously setting up that woman to use her, even at the cost of her life perhaps, to bring down that troublesome rabbi. And so his claim that he is the light of the world sparks an attack on him that focuses on his apparent violation of their tradition that a single witness should not be allowed to testify. The Lord's response is that he isn't a single witness because the Father is also bearing witness with him. And the encounter closes with the Lord's statement in verse 19 that you do not know either me or my Father. If you had known me, my Father also you would know. Chapter 8, verse 12. Again, therefore, Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. The one following me will certainly not walk in darkness, but he will have the light of life. In this passage, the Lord uses the expression again. He says, Ego eimi, I am. I am the light of the world. Now, in his interaction with the accusers of the woman caught in adultery, the Lord Jesus shone as the light of the world, and the sinful accusers withdrew from that light in their darkness. And that event becomes a springboard for the following debate or interaction. It is as if he summarized that interaction along with the following conversation by using the phrase, I am the light of the world. This expression is very appropriate at the end of the Feast of Booths because in addition to that pouring of that water over the altar at the end of the procession from the Pool of Siloam to the altar, they also lit 4 large lights in the courtyard of the women, and they danced with joy all night with torches. But as mentioned earlier, this claim to be the light of the world directly clashes with the claim of the Jewish religion that the Torah was the light of the world. So here again, in accord with John 1:17, the Lord is asserting that he and his grace and truth are far superior to Moses and the law of Moses. By the way, this expression is closely related to chapter 1, verse 5, that seed thought, where it's written, and that light shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot grasp it. Could also be translated, and the darkness cannot overcome it. And didn't that just so perfectly happen there in that courtyard? That light shines in the darkness of those evil accusers, and the darkness couldn't overcome him. And in fact, all of chapter 8 and chapter 9 expand this brief phrase that he is the light of the world. In the Old Testament, light had many connotations. The glory of the Lord shone from the cloud during the day and from the fire at night to guide, as we read in Exodus 13, 21 and 22, and to protect, as we read in Exodus 14, 19 through 25, the people of Israel. In Psalm 27, verse 1, we read, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom will I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Whom will I dread? And in Psalm 119, 105, we read, your word is a lamp for my feet and a light for my path. Compare also in Isaiah 60, 19 through 22. That statement, I am the light of the world, must have been a great challenge for the crowds of people that were still in Jerusalem because of the Feast of Booths. And this statement isn't just an empty theological statement. There's a blessing for those who apply it, for those who believe. That person that believes, he will have the light of life. That light which produces life, just as the bread of life produced life. This expression, the light of the world, is not used openly in this chapter after this verse, because the Jews brought up the challenge. They challenged the Lord's right to testify about himself. So the expression, the light of the world, which is the background of chapter 9, is repeated in 9:5. And this theme reaches its climax at the end of chapter 9. There, the Lord sums it all up by saying that the blind see the light, and those that can see are blind to the light. Chapter 8, verse 13. Therefore the Pharisees said to him, "Concerning yourself you testify. Your testimony is not valid." And the way this is written in Greek, concerning yourself you testify, the Greek su, meaning you, is used, and it brings emphasis. You yourself testify. So it's emphatic. And then the word here translated valid is that very common word, aletheis. It normally means true, but in a context like this, it doesn't seem to mean true. It seems to mean valid. The idea being that in a court of law, there's testimony which can be brought into the trial, and it's valid testimony. It's submittable evidence, you might say. Whether it's true or not is another question, but here they're even bringing up the question of whether he is even able to say this. They're saying it's not even valid for you to say this, not talking about whether it's true or not. They're dismissing it as inadmissible. It's not a valid testimony, but they have to use the word aletheis, which could also mean true, but I don't think it means true here. The Pharisees didn't respond to the theme of him being the light of the world. Instead, they look for an opportunity to attack him. They look for a weak point in his presentation. So they brought up the problem of the validity of his testimony. Now in Deuteronomy 17:6 and 19:15, the law requires more than one witness for somebody to be found guilty. The testimony of only one person in a court case where guilt and innocence is trying to be determined was invalid and couldn't be admitted as evidence in a court case, a trial to determine if someone was guilty or not. But the law didn't actually disallow testimony from the accused. So their objection is based upon their traditions, not upon the law of Moses. Jewish legal tradition did not allow testimony from the accused. So their objection, it seems, was based upon their traditions and not upon the law of Moses. Even so, besides that, this is not a courtroom, and guilt and innocence isn't really the issue at hand. So their use of these judicial language and judicial requirements seems inappropriate. Chapter 8, verse 14, Jesus replied and said to them, "Even if I testify concerning myself, my testimony is valid, because I know from where I come and where I am going. But you do not know from where I come and where I am going." The truth described in 5:19 through 30 and 36 and 37 is repeated in this section with almost the same words. They reject his testimony, even though they don't know anything about him. They are not capable of judging or determining the validity of the Lord's testimony. Chapter 8, verse 15, you judge according to the flesh. I'm not judging anyone. There's no contradiction between this verse and verse 16. The Lord does not judge as they judge, that is, according to the flesh. He doesn't judge based on what is seen. In the following verses, he explains his way of judging. Chapter 8, verse 16. And if I judge, my judgment is true, because I am not alone, but I and the Father who sent me. That's a literal translation, rather wooden. Maybe a proper, smooth English translation might read something like, but I am with the Father that sent me. Now the word if here, he says, and if I judge, the word if here is the word eon. There's two ifs, so to speak, in Greek, a and eon. This is eon. It's the if that might be translated something like, if supposing. This if doesn't answer the question about whether that thing is actually going to happen or not. It's if supposing I judge. The Lord Jesus judges based on his relationship with God the Father. In line with 5:30, he judges according to the will of the Father that sent me, he says. On a human level, he only testifies about himself. That's what they see, without any other people's testimony. But actually, he's testifying, and God the Father is also testifying. Chapter 8, verse 17. And in your law it is written that the testimony of two men is valid. Deuteronomy 19:15 says, one witness shall not arise against a man towards any iniquity or towards any sin in any sin which he has sinned. Upon the mouth of two witnesses, or upon the mouth of three witnesses, a matter may arise. And you can also look at Deuteronomy 17:6. These passages seem to indicate that the testimony of a single witness is not valid in court. But the testimony of two people is valid evidence that must be admitted into a court of law for consideration. Again, we're talking not about whether something is true in this context, but we're talking about whether it's valid testimony, testimony that is admissible in a trial of law. So it seems like the rules for admissible evidence in Deuteronomy are being discussed here. Chapter 8, verse 18. I am the one testifying concerning myself, and the Father that sent me testifies concerning me. Again, we see the ego eimi here. The Lord Jesus is claiming that he himself, with God the Father, are sufficient witnesses in this discussion. If the Lord Jesus does stand in this relationship with the Father, why would any other human witness be called for? Chapter 8, verse 19. Therefore they were saying to him, where is your Father? Jesus answered, you do not know either me or my Father. If you had known me, my Father also you would know. Once again, they did not understand his words. Their lack of understanding indicates that they did not know God the Father or the Lord Jesus. Chapter 8, verse 20. Jesus spoke these words in the treasury, teaching in the temple complex, and no one seized him because his hour had not yet come. We have seen this expression that his hour had not yet come in chapter 2, verse 4. The Lord Jesus says to his mother, what is that for me and for you, woman? My hour has not yet come. And in chapter 7, verse 30, we also see this, no one seized him. They failed to see him there in chapter 7, verse 30 as well. This location, the treasury, it's within the temple complex. It's not described, but it seems that it was in the court of women, because in Mark 12, 41 and 42, a widow put money in it there in the treasury. And Morris tells us, the commentary writer Morris tells us, that the Sanhedrin's meeting room was not far away. Even though the Lord Jesus was in that crowded place, no one seized him. Obviously, they still hated him. They still wanted to bring him down. But their plans could not yet be carried out because, in God's timing, his hour had not yet come. So, by way of summary here for this brief passage, the Lord's claim that he is the light of the world sparks an attack that focuses on his apparent violation of their tradition that a single witness should not be allowed to testify. The Lord's response is that he is not a single witness, because the Father, whom they don't know, is also bearing witness. And in this way, we see that the conflict with disbelief continues.